Keir Starmer has announced that he will resign as Prime Minister and leader of the Labour Party to spend more time with his family. They all say that. The real reason is fairly obvious. After Andy Burnham's election to Parliament, Starmer realised he wasn't likely to win if a leadership election was called, and decided to throw in the towel before anything could happen that might divide the party. That's actually quite a mature decision. Burnham himself has said he will put himself forward to be elected leader. The other Labour MP who has emerged as a potential challenger, Wes Streeting, has said he'll back Burnham, prompting suggestions that he did not win enough support from fellow MPs. So the future seems clear, an unopposed coronation for Burnham. That leaves us clear to discuss the legacy Starmer will leave behind him. Labour peer and Minister Jackie Smith on Sky News said the reason we've got a Labour government is because Starmer cleared anti-Semitism out of our party. He put our party back into the service of the British people when it had lost its way. That's why we were able to win a landslide. But this is not true. Fewer people voted for Labour in 2024 than in 2019. The party won as many seats as it did because the right-wing vote was split between the Conservatives and Reform UK, and many Tory voters stayed at home in disgust at its failings over the previous 4.5 years. Others were less keen to mince their words. Former Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn, whose own chances of being Prime Minister were arguably sabotaged by right-wingers within the party, wrote, "Keir Starmer could have ended child poverty, homelessness and the grotesque levels of inequality in this country. Instead, he abandoned those in need, destroyed our civil liberties and facilitated genocide in Gaza. That is how this Prime Minister will be remembered, and that is the legacy of moral and political bankruptcy he leaves behind." And Greek politician Yanis Varoufakis was even more damning. Keir Starmer was not merely a disappointment, he is a mendacious figure of ethical decrepitude. A man who won the Labour Party leadership based on promises that he jettisoned 5 seconds after winning. A Labour leader who dared banish from the Labour Party not only his predecessor, but also remarkable human beings like director Ken Loach, the gentleman who has taken the historic Labour Party and transformed it into a vessel for the very oligarchy it was elected to restrain. Consider the litany of Starmer's moral and logical failures. He promised a different Britain, yet his actions were a masterclass in Tory-light politics, using the same maxed-out credit card analogies that once served the austerity brigades to justify his own failure of vision. He promised a human rights lawyer's approach, but he embraced a racist-light version of Farage. On Europe, Starmer promised Brexiteers that Brexit is Brexit, yet stood before those who yearned to rejoin the European Union, winked at them to make them feel that Britain would gradually reconnect, even rejoin, with the EU while offering nothing of substance. This is not leadership, it is a fraud. And then there's the manner in which Starmer and his government rushed to offer Israel unequivocal support in pursuing its genocide in Gaza, sacrificing precious political and civil liberties in the UK by imprisoning grandmothers, priests and peaceful activists who dared support Palestine Action, an organisation that Starmer and his minions proscribed as terrorists for practising the usual activist tactics of trespassing to spray paint military planes that had demonstrably aided in the genocide. To add insult to injury, Starmer performed the diplomatic pantomime of recognising a Palestinian state in a manner that ensured it would never happen. But above all else, this is a government that has learned nothing from the post-2008 era. Starmer and his Chancellor are playing the same tired austerity game while enabling and empowering the finance curse perpetrated by the City of London, throwing in for good measure cuts in international aid to fund a military spending trickle under the guise of a strategic defence review. It is the same old doctrine: austerity for the masses, socialism for the financiers and the arms dealers. History will remember Mr. Starmer as a man without conviction, a Prime Minister who offers not a shred of honesty, but merely the cruel illusion of change. He is ethically decrepit because he had chosen consciously to abandon principle for power, and for that history will indict him. Good riddance, I say. In his speech on Monday, June 22nd, he said he would give his successor my full and unequivocal support, knowing that they will inherit a Britain that is far stronger and fairer than the one I inherited 2 years ago. Well, who's right? Starmer and his supporters, or their detractors? In fairness, the answer is a little of both. Economically, he trapped himself with self-imposed fiscal rules and a determination to reassure the markets that Labour could be trusted with the public finances. This left him pursuing what amounted to nothing better than a gentler vision of conservative austerity. Public services remained under enormous pressure. Poverty and inequality persisted, and many voters who expected transformative change concluded that they had merely exchanged one Tory government for another. His welfare policies proved especially damaging. Attempts to reduce spending on disability and sickness benefits alienated Labour supporters who had expected compassion from a party founded to protect vulnerable people. Child poverty remained stubbornly high, with the stubborn refusal to abolish the two-child benefit cap until it became impossible to resist. And that became a symbol of what critics regarded as misplaced priorities. On immigration and asylum, Starmer repeatedly adopted rhetoric designed to appeal to people tempted by Reform UK's anti-immigrant rabble-rousing, but often succeeded only in alienating progressives. His opponents accused him of trying to imitate Nigel Farage rather than confronting him. Civil liberties campaigners attacked legislation aimed at protest movements and direct action groups, arguing that a former human rights lawyer had ended up presiding over restrictions he would never have supported in his previous role. His response to foreign crises, particularly the Gaza conflict, is well critiqued by Messrs Varoufakis and Corbyn. He did not restore funding or personnel to public services that had been starved by Tory austerity, meaning those services remain stretched to breaking point, vulnerable to mistakes that can cause serious harm to members of the public, and unable to cope with historically high workloads. Nor did he act to end the farce that has been the privatisation of public utilities like water and energy firms. His renationalisation of rail only extended to the companies charging for tickets, not to ownership of rolling stock or the lines themselves. Perhaps the deepest criticism, though, concerned trust. Starmer won the Labour leadership on a programme that promised continuity with the party's social democratic tradition, only to abandon those commitments entirely. It was a betrayal that many would say became a hallmark of Starmer's leadership. He was what Labour legend Tony Benn would call a weathercock politician, turning in whichever direction the wind blew rather than ever actually standing up for anything. There were improvements. although some may say these had little to do with Starmer, or were more in spite of him than because of him. NHS waiting lists started to come down after years of post-pandemic pressures and underinvestment before that. Relations with European neighbours became less confrontational, reducing some of the self-inflicted tensions that had characterised the immediate post-Brexit years. There was greater political stability after the chaos of the Johnson-Truss-Sunak period, and some long-stalled infrastructure and energy projects finally moved ahead. His defenders would also point to stronger workers' rights legislation, moves toward green investment, and efforts to reform planning laws and increase house building. None of these amounted to a political revolution. At best, they represented tiny, incremental progress after years in which the country had been left to drift by the Tories. So Starmer's government achieved some practical improvements, but squandered the goodwill and political capital with which it began, on broken promises and betrayals of trust. He promised much more than competent administration, but failed to achieve even that. His fall is poetic justice for an overcautious lawyer who won power by offering hope and then governed by managing decline.